The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Non-domestic rating, multipliers and private schools bill, not amended in Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
If people are exiting, they must exit quietly and swiftly. That's okay. We will now begin with new clause 1, with which it will be convenient to consider other new clauses and amendments as listed on the selection paper. I call Vikki Slade to move new clause 1.
I beg to move new clause 1. You're supposed to speak now. Madam Deputy Speaker, business rate reform is long overdue. It is frequently cited by my constituents as the biggest concern for their survival and one of the most direct inhibitors to their growth. I was contacted just this week by a local business in Three-Legged Cross, right on the edge of my constituency. He's been running for over 40 years, and the cliff edge created by the small business rate relief means his rates bill is going up from £2,800 a year to £8,500. The only thing that will save this micro business is systemic change, as proposed by the Lib Dems in our manifesto, and not a tax based on the arbitrary valuation that bears no relationship to the activity taking place inside his building. High streets are trying to redefine themselves, moving from the heart of goods purchasing to literal shop windows as they struggle to compete against online competitors who don't have their overheads. But it would be wrong to think that the solution is to try to return to the perfect high street of the past, as if such a thing exists. I'm old enough to remember C&A being the place that me and my friends would browse for the latest fashions, with a Blockbuster video store and a pick and mix from Woolies. Where are they now? It is dangerous and self-defeating to be caught up in the toxic nostalgia trying to reclaim the past as some kind of perfect place. Parliament must create legislation that supports the society of tomorrow and towels that will work for a technological, multicultural age, and indeed one in which people can no longer afford stuff that we used to buy on a Saturday afternoon, or, like I am today, choosing to buy their stuff from second-hand stores. The dangerous gap between the slashing of retail, hospitality and leisure relief by almost half to a regime that brings in as yet undefined new multipliers brings with it real risk. Our new Clause 1 would require a review of the impact of Clauses 1 to 4 on businesses, high streets and on the real prize, so frequently repeated by this government, economic growth. There's been a lot of talk in recent months about decisions being made without clear impact assessments, and as we move through a period of reform to enshrine this into law, rather than question whether it's been done later, would save us all a lot of trouble and demonstrate that the government genuinely wants to improve improvements. Yeah, of course.
Very grateful for the Lib Dem spokesman giving way. One of the other issues that she hasn't had a look at, or certainly hasn't mentioned yet, is the employment rights bill that's going to come into play as well, that puts further red tape on our high street businesses and the impact that would have. Would the Lib Dems consider that should be a consideration for this government? Because it's one thing having these taxes and these rates changed. It's another thing then putting red tape at the very same time constraining these businesses with their growth.
Thank you. I thank you for your intervention, and I agree that this is a really difficult time to be a small business with so many things changing at the same time, not least the national insurance rates that are increasing. But just to move back to the role of the high streets, the most successful high streets are moving quickly to reinvent themselves. And since being elected, I've been trying to find myself a high street location for my constituency office. Decided to base myself in the historic market town of Wimborne, where my mum lived and my children went to school. It's the fastest growing community in mid-Dorset and North Poole. The ministers will have heard about it many times as I talk about the problems with housing there. Great bus routes, great place to find a small unit, but I was wrong. Such is the strength of the sense of place, the innovation of its businesses and the hard work of its bid and its town council, that when a business closes down, there are others waiting to move in. I finally found my new home, which will open by the end of the month when we fitted it out, but the experience proved what I already knew. The high street can survive, but only when the business community is prepared to give people what they want. With retailers like Tickles & Co. trading alongside the hospice shop, and then old businesses like Bartlett's with 120 years of selling smart clothes for all seasons, able to sustain despite the changes in the market. The Lib Dems welcome the proposal to permanently reduce the business rates for retail, hospitality and leisure, and we do acknowledge that the financial situation they've been left in by the previous government would make the 75% discount difficult to maintain. But any discount is worthless if these businesses trying to stabilise following a COVID pandemic, the energy crisis and a shift to online cashless purchasing don't even make it through the next year. I have previously commented that this is not the reform that business needs. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister has already said this is just phase one, but we are incredibly frustrated that he's not taken the opportunity to take things further. New Clause 3, in the name of my honourable friend, the member for St Albans, focuses this further on the retail, hospitality and leisure sector and raises some really valid points about the risk to the individual businesses against those with multiple branches. And this assessment does need to take place alongside a broader impact assessment.
On that point?
Of course.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. She's giving an impassioned speech about the importance of business rates reform. Would she agree with me that there is a risk of unintended consequences with what the government is proposing? At the moment, with the 75% relief, there is a cap of that relief at £110,000, but in 2 years' time, when the relief goes to zero, that cap won't exist. House of Commons library research shows that the net effect could be that small businesses could end up being 80% worse off, whilst the big chains, such as Starbucks, could actually be 40% better off. And whilst it's important we get a review of the impact of business rates, it's important we also get that differential assessment as well, as set out in New Clause 3.
Thank you. I completely agree with you. I think this is one of the problems we are seeing is that law of unintended consequences that we've also seen with things like the national insurance that we repeat over and over again that is impacting on small businesses, hospices, doctor surgeries and things like that, when it is quite understandable that there's an attempt to try and raise funds from elsewhere. I just want to share the views of Anthony Woodhouse. Unfortunately, I'm not able to be at their event in Portcullis House because of today's timing. He's the chair of Hall and Woodhouse Brewery and Pub Chain, founded and based in Dorset, but with a branch just across the way from this place. He told me that the revaluing of property when you've just invested huge amounts of money to make it fit for a changing market, before you've even had a chance to benefit from that changing market, is completely crazy and is discouraging businesses from investing. So it's really important that as we really look to reform business rates, that we look at that as well. Despite a failure to include this, businesses like Anthony's are responding to the market. Pubs like the Olive Branch in Wimborne and the Old Granary on Wareham Quay are now places where muddy boots, children and dogs are welcome and where they sell as many cups of coffee as pints of local beer. And the high street needs to morph as they do, and they need to be ready and willing to change. But while business rate reform rightly starts with the high street, it's important it doesn't end with the high street. And so I turn to our amendments 1 to 6, which would add manufacturing businesses to the lower multiplier. The UK has a rich history of manufacturing excellence, and the Barclays Made in Britain report found that British-made products held an important influence over consumers' decision to purchase, with customers perceiving them to be high quality, reliable and internationally respected. The Made in Britain tag was found to be worth an additional £3.5 billion a year to our UK exporters, which is why we believe that the lower multiplier should also apply to manufacturing businesses. We need to give them a shot in the arm to ensure that they can compete on the world stage. The threats by the incoming President Trump to put tariff on UK products, our continued isolation from our neighbours through an inadequate Brexit deal, and the rapid growth of economies like China and India represent a real threat to local manufacturing. Poole Holdings, based in my constituency, has stood ready to produce its innovative Cool Pack here in the UK. Anybody that's got children will know the brand Cool Pack. It's that ice pack that's not even ice. And they have been modifying the equipment so that they can make the product here in Dorset to compete with China. They stand ready to drive up those sales. Recognition through a lower multiplier, or at least the potential to include them in a lower multiplier if the market becomes more tricky, is the intent behind this amendment. And turning to the Amendments 7 and 8 in the name of the Shadow Minister, I reflect that the Liberal Democrats simply do not believe in the taxation of education. Alongside the changes around VAT, the removal of the special status for schools is really disappointing. Therefore, these amendments that seek to recognise the value that schools where children whose needs are difficult to meet elsewhere, whether that's special educational needs and disabilities, or where people are choosing to educate in a faith school, seem reasonable. In summary, Madam Deputy Speaker. This bill is a fair start, and some businesses will feel it's better than the abyss that might otherwise have been. But the government could have and should have taken different decisions to protect those businesses facing additional costs in just a few weeks' time. We are often asked, how would we pay for it then? And I welcome that discussion, as there have been many proposals in our manifesto, from taxing big banks to asking gambling companies to pay their fair share. I recognise, on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, that the government has worked quickly to bring forward this bill, but the risks of losing businesses en route to something better are just too great. Yeah. We need proper reform so that businesses of the mid-21st centuries can weather the storms ahead.
Well done. Clark. You.
Review of impact on businesses, high streets and economic growth.
The question is that new Clause 1 be read a second time, and I come to the first of the backbench contributions, Adam Thompson.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak again on this bill, having been part of the scrutiny process through the committee stages. The committee heard representations through those stages from a wide variety of experts in related fields, and I was heartened by the news that many experts felt this bill would have a positive impact on 98% of the retail stores that make up our communities. Small convenience stores, in particular, like the local co-op or the Great British Corner Shop, will see great benefits in their capacity to support staffing, security and other operational functions. Our incredible independent shopkeepers, like those who populate the high streets of Ilkeston and Long Eaton in my constituency, will see more funds to take on additional staff, improve their security setups and gain long-term confidence in their ability to serve our community. These measures, Madam Deputy Speaker, represent a simple, common-sense approach to rebalancing the scales in favour of local retailers and away from the online giants, increasing taxes on the biggest players while relieving the burden on local retailers. I will give way. Yeah.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. He may have heard my earlier intervention. He's absolutely right, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. We have to shift the burden away from small businesses onto those big online retailers. But that could be undermined if all we do is shift the burden from small businesses. If we shift the burden to the big chains. At the moment, House of Commons Library Research is saying that small independent businesses are going to end up subsidising these big chains. Does he share my concern? This could be an unintended consequence, and the government must look at it.
I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and I would refer to the Hansard of the discussions that we had in the committee stages. That wasn't something that came through from the evidence that we heard in those stages, but I do respect that she's made that point and thank her for doing so. Another sector, Madam Deputy Speaker, subject to benefit significantly from these measures, as we just heard from the honourable members opposite, are our local pubs. The fine folk frequenting the Sawley Junction in Long Eaton in my constituency, or the Bull's Head in Breaston, can rest easy that their locals are in safe hands. These measures that we are bringing forward today will reduce the tax burden on the hospitality sector more generally, a sector that's generally considered by many to be overtaxed. I'm very glad that the government has been able to offer something positive to this sector, having been broadly forgotten for many years. Some opponents to this bill have suggested that the removal of charitable relief from non-domestic rates for private schools would have a negative impact on the parents of privately educated children. As such, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was strongly heartened during the committee stages to hear from one of our experts in the scrutiny process, Professor Francis Green, Professor of Work and Education Economics at the University of College London Institute of Education, who noted that this bill will have a marginal effect on the education sector, and that the policy was fair and that it would generally not have a great deal of impact on the proportion of children in private schools, which has remained broadly constant over the past 20 years, despite a cash terms doubling in fee prices. Madam Deputy Speaker, the committee stages of this bill, I will give way.
If the honourable gentleman might like to reflect on what he just said. He's just said the proportion of children going to private schools has stayed constant. Even the government's own analysis doesn't say that. It says the number has stayed broadly constant. In fact, the proportion's come down.
I thank the honourable member, and if I am correct, I stand corrected, but my understanding from the experts when we spoke to them was that the proportions have remained broadly consistent. My apologies if that is incorrect, but thank you for the intervention. Anyway, Madam Deputy Speaker, the committee stages of this bill reaffirmed what many of us on the government benches already knew to be the case. This bill represents a common-sense modification to our tax policy that will support local small businesses.
This bill represents a core pillar of this government's goal to rebalance the scales away from large online giants in favour of local independence and towards the 94% of children educated in the state sector. I know that traders and families in Ilkeston, Long Eaton and the surrounding villages in my constituency will broadly benefit from these measures, and I'm proud to support this bill through its remaining stages unamended. Thank you.
Sarah Bool.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I intend to confine my remarks today to two specific amendments, number 3 and number 10, in relation to private schools and SEND, and the delay that the introduction of this tax hike will have on such schools that would have and delay the introduction of this tax hike such that schools would have more time to financially plan. Madam Deputy Speaker, schools in my constituency have been punished by a series of tax rises since this Labour government took office in July. By adding VAT to private school fees and now ending their charitable business rate relief status, Labour are attacking aspiration. These tax hikes will not hurt the wealthiest. It is those people who have scrimped and saved to send their children to a school of their choice that will be hit the worst. Now, Labour seems to believe that you should not have a choice over where you send your child to school, which is evident in their similarly misguided schools bill currently making its way through this place. But schools will close because of this tax hike. And I know this because it's happening in my own constituency of South Northamptonshire. Carder School, founded in 1957, survived the Cold War, the winter of discontent, the global financial crisis and 3 Labour governments, yet it could not withstand the tax onslaught from this Chancellor and will close its doors at the end of the summer term. This will mean 120 pupils flooding back into the state system that is already struggling with capacity at a huge cost to the taxpayer. I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. I just want to refer to the comments made a few minutes ago, Madam Deputy Speaker, about how the experts suggested that this particular bill would have marginal, negligible impact on the education sector. If she could reflect on those points.
Thank you. That may be the evidence that you have received in this instance, but I'm giving a real-life proof. When I was speaking to the head teacher about this example, they said the combination of the increase of national insurance on teachers' costs, which is about 80% of their outgoings, combined with this removal, all these things combined, has a huge impact. And the evidence is they have to shut. So they will be closing their doors at the end of July 2025, which is an absolute travesty.
For a moment you mentioned the word you and I wasn't asking the question. Continue.
I wouldn't dare say that about you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Apologies. Madam Deputy Speaker, if the government is intent on punishing the aspiration of my constituents for the future of their children, the least they can do is grant the concessions we are asking for in all of our amendments, specifically number 7 and 10. Now, Amendment 7 would exempt those private schools who wholly or partially provide education for those SEND children who have not yet obtained an EHC plan or whose needs are established but not so severe as to require one. SEND support in schools helps pupils with level of need below that of an EHC plan. Now, restricting relief to only those who provide for the most severe needs is out of step with the rest of our education system. Many families, upon not being successful in either applying for an EHC plan or indeed enduring huge waiting times for the local authority to put one in place, opt to send their children to a private school. We should not punish families that choose to do what is in the best interests of their children. And now Amendment 10 would delay the introduction of this tax hike for a further year to allow schools to plan their finances accordingly. And this is just plain common sense and would mean that fewer schools like Cardiff have to make the unenviable choice of closing their doors.
Would you give way on that point?
Of course I would.
I think she's really hit the nail on the head, a timing issue here. The Labour government was upfront on this tax rise in their manifesto, explicitly, but they claim that they care about children's education and welfare. If that is the case, why would you implement this change halfway through an academic year? We've just heard from another member that turns around and says, well, it doesn't matter because it's 120 kids in the member's constituency. Well, Actually, that really does, because every single child's education matters, and even if it is a small amount at the margin, simply delaying it, as the schools, the experts and the parents have asked for, I think is completely justifiable. Would she agree with me?
Thank you. I totally concur, and it's powerfully made points, because the impact goes just not beyond the 120 individual students. It also goes to the arrangements for their parents and how they're working, because often the head teacher of my school is obviously a head teacher. Her husband was also a teacher, and it had huge impacts upon what they're going to do with their children as well, if they can manage with the new school place arrangements. So I think it is terribly misguided. So we do need to really think about what we're doing, because I think it is an absolute travesty that we will lose a school. No, I'll keep going if you don't mind. No, but I think it's an absolute travesty, and I do not want to see any other schools close or any other children suffer as a result of this plan. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope that colleagues across the House will join us this afternoon in supporting these amendments.
Davies.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very pleased to be speaking in favour of the bill that's in front of us today, a significant piece of legislation that aims to reform the non-domestic rating system in England. I welcome the primary objective of this bill, to create a fairer and more balanced approach to non-domestic rating. By increasing the multipliers for large businesses, we ensure that these entities contribute their fair share to the local economy. This change is particularly important as it addresses the disparity between large corporations and smaller businesses, which often struggle to compete under the current system. The introduction of lower multipliers for retail, hospitality and leisure properties is a much-needed relief for these sectors. These industries have faced significant challenges, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. By reducing their tax burden, this bill aims to support their recovery and growth, ultimately benefiting local communities and economies such as the hospitality and retail sector in my constituency. One of the most notable aspects of this bill is the removal of the charitable relief for private schools. While private schools play a role in our education system, it's essential to recognise that they operate as businesses and should be taxed accordingly. This change will generate additional revenue that can be invested in public services, including state schools. The bill represents a step towards a more equitable and balanced tax system. It addresses the needs of various sectors, supports local economies, and ensures that all entities contribute fairly to the public good. Thank you.
Madam Deputy Speaker. There are problems with all taxes, and that's why we end up with a blend of taxes. And in business tax, of course, we have tax on payroll, on sales, on profit, and on property. But business rates are a particularly difficult and unpopular tax because they represent a fixed cost on the business that doesn't vary when the economy goes up or goes down, doesn't vary with that particular individual company's success or growth or contraction in its sales or profits. And I've heard over the years many times from businesses in Alton, in Petersfield, in Horndean, Clanfield, Liss and elsewhere in East Hampshire about a desire for business rate reform. And I'm sure a lot of small business owners were very attracted to what they heard from the Labour Party, which of course was that they were going to scrap business rates altogether. Now, they don't say that anymore, but they still want us to believe that this is some great reform that they're undertaking, cutting rates for our high street businesses. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm afraid it is all smoke and mirrors, because for those businesses, including ones that have just been name-checked by members of Parliament opposite, the big effect they're going to feel right now is the cut in the relief for retail and hospitality business. Not a small cut, a cut from 75% to 40%. And it would be bad enough if that was all they were facing, but of course it is not. There's all sorts of difficulties that businesses have to cope with the whole time. We also have rising labour costs, and of course we support the increase over time of the national living wage. But this hike in employer national insurance contributions at the same time and particularly the effect, because of what's happening with the threshold, the massive effect that is going to have on part-time workers. This is something which is very difficult for retail and hospitality businesses to swallow. Now, of course, in and of themselves, the changes to the multiplier, those cuts for high street businesses, they are welcome. But we must remember that that is balanced by increases elsewhere in the system. And sometimes members opposite talk about big businesses and corporations as some unwelcome part of our economy. They are the biggest employers in the country. They are fundamental to our economy. And overall, these changes, if you look at the Red Book, overall these changes involve increases of hundreds of millions of pounds in business rates being levied. And who will the increased rates affect? Large supermarkets, one of the biggest employing sectors in the country. Hotels, again, a really important employer, but also fundamental for travel and tourism. I wonder if the Minister could say a word to us later about the effect expected on the National Health Service. And of course, you know, they talk, if you read the blurb around the budget, it says we're going to be attacking these distribution centres, which are including those used by online retailers. That word including does a lot of work in that sentence, because of course high street retailers also have distribution centres, and this is going to add to their cost, fuelling food inflation and the inflation of everyday consumer goods. I'm happy to give way.
He's making an excellent observation of the impact of what will happen with these costs. The result is, and we know from the surveys, that 75% of businesses are going to pass on those costs to the very people who are trying to use it. This has this internal sort of inflammatory and inflationary impact on the public. Does he agree? And isn't this imperative to make sure we think about it?
My honourable friend is, as ever, spot on. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the end, there is no such thing as a tax on business. You cannot tax a business. You can only tax people. And any tax on business, ultimately, is a tax on its employees, its customers, or its owners. And just bear in mind, before somebody jumps up and starts talking about the owners are quite often pension funds who are then paying out the pensions for our mums and dads. So the point I was making was that actually these business rate increases are going to mean higher costs also for bricks and mortar companies, and of course coming on top of all those other changes, including in particular the hike in employer national insurance contributions. And this, Madam Deputy Speaker, from a government who yet again this week keep talking about their growth agenda. And it does slightly make you wonder what is written on that growth agenda. Overall, the effect of all these changes, you look at the Budget Red Book, the effect overall is that the revenue from business rates is projected to increase from £32 billion this financial year, 3-2, up to almost £40 billion in 5 years' time. It is a massive further tax raid on business, a brake on employment and economic growth. And, of course,
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. He's giving a very impassioned speech about the case for the overhaul of the business rate system. I just wonder why the previous Conservative government never got round to doing it.
Well, I did refer right at the start of what I said to the calls there have been over the years for reform. I also said that there are problems with all taxes that you levy, actually on individuals or on business, and that's why you end up with a blend. What I'm talking about now is that this government is hiking up the total amount that's going to be taken in business rates. It is going to fall on major employers. That will be felt in our unemployment rate. And they're trying to do this thing of saying, well, we're cutting stuff. But they're not. Because in reducing the relief, that is going to outweigh, for all these companies we've heard name checked, that is going to outweigh the effect of the multiplier. And then on top of that, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've got a revaluation coming up in the near future. And that is going to mean probably an increase in rateable values, which is going to compound those higher multiples. And so for all these reasons, new clause 2, I think, is both very important and a very, very reasonable ask. To say that after a period of time, we should review the real-life effect of these changes and give the government an opportunity to change course and to get back to something that looks a bit like a growth agenda. Madam Deputy Speaker, I turn now briefly to the effects of these changes on independent schools, and we have debated in this chamber on a number of occasions the government's overall approach to independent schools. Let me say again that we object in principle to taxing of education. It makes us almost unique in the world that we would do such a thing, and the first time in our national history, something never done before, by the way, by any Labour government. And this tax change that we're debating today on rates is, of course, not the only tax change or transfer of money from independent schools to the Treasury. They were already facing a big increase, I think 5 percentage point increase in employer contributions on the teacher pension scheme. Then, like all organisations, public sector, private sector, charitable and voluntary sector, they have employer national insurance contributions to deal with. And then the enormous change of VAT. Specifically on this tax change, for the very reason I spoke about right at the top, that it's a fixed cost. Yeah. When there's all this uncertainty going around the independent education sector, when there will be children moving. Now, you can have a debate. By the way, no one knows. Can I just let you into a secret? You could line up all the experts you like. No one knows what the ultimate effect will be. But we know it will be a non-trivial number greater than 0. There are going to be children moving out of that sector. There is a lot of uncertainty. It seems a very, very unwise time to add on top of all those other tax changes a significant change to a fixed cost tax. And so the amendments that have been put forward by the opposition and my honourable friend from South Northamptonshire, I think, made the case very strongly, are very well worth colleagues supporting. On faith schools, and we know, by the way, that although whatever the impact assessment thing says, people of faith, and particularly of smaller faiths, are going to be disproportionately impacted by this government's changes to education. SENDs, special educational needs and disabilities, which we know children with special needs is a particularly prominent feature in the independent sector. And there are many, many of those schools that have an awful lot of children with special needs, but not necessarily, or not yet, an education, health and care plan. And special consideration should be given to both those types of schools. Faith schools, and if you wanted to narrow it down further, you could say smaller faiths charging low fees to parents and those catering to children with special educational needs and disabilities. And then Amendment 10, at the very least, with all else that is going on in the independent sector, at the very least, it seems an exceptionally reasonable ask to make of the government, that we would at least delay these changes by a year to give the sector some chance to be able to cope and plan.
Deirdre Costigan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you for allowing me to take part in this debate. Having been a member of the Bill Committee, my first Bill Committee in this place, I appreciate being able to contribute here in the Chamber. Madam Deputy Speaker, Southall Town Centre is well known the world over as a great place to shop for an Asian wedding, with stunning lehengas, saris and shawani on sale all down the Broadway, King Street and South Road. But during the election campaign, I vividly recall seeing 2 clothes shop workers eating their lunchtime rotis behind the counter. When I commented business must be good, they both said no. They said a few years ago they would never have had time for lunch. They would work right up until closing as they were so busy. They told me that they were suffering from being undercut by online retailers because they were paying through the nose for business rates. They were facing blitz robberies with no police around to respond, and they were constantly having to chase bigger businesses for payments. So it's ironic that the previous government have suddenly decided they back local businesses after 14 years of ignoring their pleas. In fact, the only businesses they supported were rail companies that couldn't run the trains, water companies that couldn't keep our water clean, and of course the private sector mates they handed out dodgy COVID contracts to. Indeed, the former Prime Minister and the former member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, Boris Johnson, reportedly used a one-letter word beginning with F when making it clear how little he cared about business. In contrast, this Labour government is backing local businesses. We're already making sure suppliers pay small businesses within 30 days, and we're cracking down on retail crime too. And today's bill will deliver on our promise to ensure a fairer system of business rates that will help bricks and mortar shops like those in Southall compete with online companies. Finally, we will have a permanently rebalanced system that will stop local shops being undercut and the slow death of our high streets and town centres. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, to turn to some of the amendments that are on the table today, new clauses 1 to 3 and Amendment 9 are all things that are already happening. We are already publishing a review of these measures as part of next year's budget, and there is already discretion for local authorities to look at the higher multiplier rate. Amendments 1 to 6, these are looking at adding manufacturing to this bill. Now, they would, in my belief, dilute the effect of the bill. We have already prioritised manufacturing as part of the budget, investing £3 billion into aerospace, automotive and the life sciences industries. We make no apologies in this bill for using it to prioritise town centres. Amendments 7 and 8 and also Amendment 10, Madam Deputy Speaker, all seek to either dilute or delay the changes in this bill. We have already exempted in the bill all private schools who are wholly or mainly focused on educating children with special educational needs. That is already in the bill. We know, though, that 93% of children in this country go to state schools. Exactly. Politics is about priorities. Hear, hear. Just like we're prioritising town centres in this bill, we're also prioritising those 93% of children. And unless the Conservatives think it's okay to have children in state schools taught maths and science by unqualified teachers, then they need to say where they would get the money from otherwise. Now, although today's bill is about a fairer system of business rates that will help local businesses, many on the other side have raised employer national insurance in this discussion. Madam Deputy Speaker, 93% of the businesses in Ealing Southall are micro businesses. Most of these businesses will either pay less employer national insurance or the same as they currently pay. Now, some businesses will pay more national insurance. But this is because the previous government ran up a massive £22 billion credit card bill, making rash promises they didn't even attempt to keep while running public services into the ground. And when the final demand letters started coming, they hid them in the back of a drawer and pretended everything was fine. Employer national insurance increases for some businesses will help us to pay for the triple lock on pensions, for thousands of extra hip and knee operations, and for more police on our streets. Again, unless the Conservatives think it's okay to reduce pensions in real terms, to let waiting lists go up, and to give our streets over to criminals, then they need to say where they would get the money from. Madam Deputy Speaker, before Christmas, I met with the brewers Heineken at their pub, the Star and Scorpion in West Ealing. Labour has already taken a penny off the pint in the budget, and our decision in this bill to permanently lower business rates for retail and hospitality businesses will help to further protect local pubs like the Star and Scorpion. Without this bill, the bars and restaurants of West Ealing and Hanwell would be facing a cliff edge in April, with big increases in their business rates, as the sticking plaster solution the last government came up with ended. This bill both extends temporary reductions in business rates for high street businesses, as well as introducing a new permanent scheme that will level the playing field between the high street and the internet. Of course, the one tax the opposition don't mention is the 10p crime tax. 10p added to every shopping basket due to the impact of shoplifting. The Tories did absolutely nothing about this, but this is a Tory tax Labour is getting rid of. We're investing in neighbourhood policing, scrapping the Tory shoplifter charter that allowed thefts under £200 to go uninvestigated, and we're bringing in a new offence of assaulting a shop worker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Conservatives had 14 years to help out local businesses like those in Ealing Southall. Instead, they trashed our economy, destroyed public services and stifled business growth. This Labour government is clearing up their mess, and through this bill we are ensuring fairer business rates for shops, restaurants and bars on Ealing Southall's high streets. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Sureena Brackenridge.
Thank you, Deputy Madam Speaker. I too was part of the committee, and I would like to put on record my thanks to all the witnesses that attended and gave their evidence. Now, for me, this bill shines a light on how politics is about choices. At the last general election, we promised a Labour government that would make different choices, choices rooted in fairness and a commitment to level the playing field. Today, this bill is a powerful example of how we are going to deliver on that promise. This is a bill about the politics of equity. It's about ensuring that everyone, from small business owners to school children in Wolverhampton North East, has a fairer chance to succeed. For too long, the scales have been tipped in favour of the largest corporations, online giants and private schools, while businesses and state schools have been left to shoulder an unfair burden. And this bill changes that. We are delivering a permanent reduction in business rates for the hard-working small businesses that are the backbone of Wolverhampton North East. My constituency doesn't include a city centre, but lots of brilliant small businesses, from fantastic cafes to restaurants, beauty and hair salons, a micro pub to larger pub chains and family-run shops. These businesses are the heart of our community. For years, high streets have been forced to compete unfairly with massive online retailers and retail parks. This bill ensures that the largest online retailers, supermarket chains and distribution warehouses finally pay a fairer share. Small businesses in Wolverhampton and Willenhall will now see a permanent lower business rate, freeing up resources to invest in their workforce, improve security and grow. As Paul Gerard of the Co-op highlighted, this reform will strengthen the viability of small shops, ensuring they can continue to provide jobs, beef up security and uphold their community-centred values. The Association of Convenience Stores has said that these changes will save small stores money that can be used directly to hire more staff, install new CCTV and invest in the future. But this bill isn't just about businesses. It's also about fairness in education too. Private schools' fees have risen by around 55% in real terms over the last 20 years, while state schools' funding has largely flatlined. Right now, state schools and academies pay business rates, while private schools have enjoyed business rates tax breaks. This is simply unfair. This is the reality. Almost 50% of private school students achieved top GCSE grades this summer, compared to just 20% in state schools. Sports facilities in state schools are crumbling, with fixtures cancelled due to a lack of minibuses or drivers. Private schools have more swimming pools than the entire state schools, FE colleges and HE institutions put together. And just 35% of children from low-income families can swim 25 metres unaided. Compare that to 82% from affluent families. This bill removes those unfair tax breaks for private schools and reinvests every single penny directly into state schools. And that funding will recruit more specialist teachers, provide breakfast clubs in primary schools and give schools the resources they need to unlock every child's potential regardless of their family's wealth. This politics of equity is in action, and I will continue to support strong, vibrant high streets, brilliant schools and a fairer future for all.
Ward. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The members opposite do not like to be reminded of the fact that our Labour government inherited a £22 billion black hole from their 14 years of Tory rule, as they are demonstrating now, but that is the fact.
Don't keep mentioning it.
With this inheritance from the Tories 6 months ago, our new government is taking much-needed action, such as that we are voting on today, particularly action to end tax breaks for private schools across the UK. And it's the education side of this bill that I will focus on today. Many of us are here today partly because of the inspiration, teaching and support that an incredible teacher gave to us. And today I would like to pay tribute to one of my teachers at school, Hermitage Academy, which is a state school. Mrs McKiernan was my modern studies teacher, and a fine job she did too. I fondly remember writing essays about the reasons for Labour's election win in 1997. They obviously had an impact. Whilst we had skillful and energetic teachers like Mrs McKiernan, what was less satisfactory was that the school roof often leaked when it rained, and sometimes the windows blew in winter. That was until the election of Labour in both Westminster and Holyrood saw my old school being rebuilt. Compare that to the situation in my constituency today, where Balweary High School in Kirkcaldy needs a new building, but funding has not been available during the last 18 years of the SNP and 14 years of Tory rule. And that is the point, Madam Deputy Speaker. Much of our country's public sector infrastructure is not fit for purpose after years of Tory neglect. To turn this around, we obviously need to raise revenue, and that is exactly what the measures that we are voting on today do. Ending tax breaks for private schools is crucial to the record budget settlement to the Scottish Government, the largest settlement since devolution, with an additional £1.5 billion to spend this financial year and an additional £3.4 billion next year. For too many in my constituency, the SNP's record of educational failure has badly let them down. Nicola Sturgeon once said, "Judge me on my education record," and promised that her government would close the attainment gap by 2026. Madam Deputy Speaker, last year the attainment gap in Scotland widened, and the PISA report showed that reading, maths and science are in long-term decline. Now that they have the funding, it is up to the SNP to clear up the education mess they have created and that fails young people in my constituency. Across the UK, we also know that when delivering large-scale investment to our schools to improve standards and increase opportunities, we have to pay for the policies we want to implement. And it is only right for those with the broadest shoulders to support others around them. As many of my colleagues have said, politics is about choices, and I am proud of the choices that my party is making. I will.
I absolutely agree that we need to make sure there's an equity in education, and you say that those with the broader shoulders are carrying this, but I have a family in Berkhamsted who really worked hard to put their son into private education, but after the changes have had to change that. So Seb is actually changing schools again just 2 years after, because the family can't afford that anymore. But just to kind of have a plea that actually is the children behind this, and it's about taking all of us up, not bringing anyone down.
I have to say, one of the things that consistently never fails to astonish me when we talk about this subject is the fact that all parents work hard to support their families. All parents want the very best for their children, and I think more members across the House would do well to remember that.
Indeed, the additional £1.8 billion a year that will be raised by ending tax break for private schools allows us to increase per pupil funding in real terms and help deliver that record budget settlement of an extra £4.9 billion to the Scottish Government. And I find it strange that the party opposite, who in the last Parliament promised to level up the country, should be so opposed to measures that will do exactly that. Indeed, the Leader of the Opposition said that her first act as Prime Minister, and I'm not sure how many of the members believe that day will actually ever come, would be to restore those tax breaks for private schools. And she obviously isn't here to defend that statement, but I've heard little from members opposite in recent months as to what they would cut to pay for that policy. Would they make teachers redundant? Would they cancel breakfast clubs? Would they cut mental health support and careers advice? Madam Deputy Speaker, at the last election I was proud to stand on a manifesto that promised to break down the barriers to opportunity. As a state-educated MP, I'm also proud to deliver this speech in a Parliament in which 63% of its members were educated at state comprehensives, with 85% state-educated on my own benches. Indeed, across Scotland, only 4% of children attend private schools, even fewer than the 7% in England. And the needs of our students are greater than ever. Our young people in Scotland face an annual marking saga, decreasing teacher numbers and a deepening mental health crisis, something that I have raised in relation to my own constituency. It is more crucial than ever that we intervene now to prevent these crises from deepening, and that is what these revenue-raising measures will help to fund. I'm glad that this Labour government has introduced protections for SEND children and for military families, but it is necessary for private schools who, let us not forget, have raised their fees by 75% in real terms since 2000 to contribute towards improving educational standards across our country. To conclude, I know that parents in Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy constituency want to see their children benefit from the kind of education that their ingenuity, creativity and innate talent deserves. They will be crucial to our future society and economy, and indeed the kind of country that we want to be. We must make the most of their potential. In this matter, I take inspiration from Jenny Lee, who attended Beath High School in my constituency and went on to set up the Open University. Her picture hangs in my office, and she knew the value of ensuring that high-quality education was available to all, no matter where they lived and no matter their background. If we are going to do this, then it has to be paid for, and that is why these measures are so important.
Mark Sewards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in favour of this bill, having been involved in the scrutiny at most stages. I'll join my honourable friend for Wolverhampton North East in thanking all of the witnesses that came forward to give evidence on the Bill Committee. I thank them for the evidence they gave and for their useful insight from their respective sectors. So on this side of the House, we are clear that small businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors should pay lower business rates. This bill establishes 2 new multipliers, lower than the current standard business rate multiplier. In order to pay for these changes, we must ask larger businesses to contribute their fair share so that our smaller businesses can thrive. And that's because we on this side of the House know that when you have tax cuts, you need to pay for them with revenue-raising measures, something the opposition have not quite realised yet. Now, this is a good mechanism that this government is deploying to save our high streets, to incentivise local investment and to support entrepreneurship. Now, high streets, as we all know, as all members in this House will know, are absolutely essential to local towns and should be given the support they need. I am pleased to say that the measures in this bill will benefit smaller businesses, local businesses, like those on Queen Street, which sits in the centre of Leeds South West and Morley. Now, during the Bill Committee stage, we heard from Paul Gerard, who's the Board Secretariat Director at the Co-op, and he told the Bill Committee that these changes will help 92% of the Co-op's retail properties. But he also estimates that they'll help 98% of retail businesses because they will have a rateable value that allows them to benefit from these changes. That has to be welcomed. And as for those that will pay more to make these changes possible, the higher multiplier will apply to properties with a value greater than or equal to £500,000. Now, this includes large warehouses, as has been referenced, that are often used by online giants. They will pay their fair share, and we can start to level that playing field so that essential community high street businesses are on a level playing field with multinational corporations. Of course, I'll give way.
Honourable gentleman for giving way, and of course he's right, but there is a challenge in making sure that things are fair and level playing field between the online world and bricks and mortar business, including in our town centres, and we all support that. There is a thing called the digital services tax, conceived, of course, while we were in government. I wonder if he'd say a word about the relative advantages and disadvantages of trying to go after online retailers with business rates change, which will also affect all manner of other organisations, including bricks and mortar retailers, or doing it a different way through a more direct type of tax.
I'm grateful for his intervention, and all I'd say is I'd return to the earlier point I made. We know that we have to support these smaller businesses, these bricks and mortar businesses, as he called them, and the only way we're going to pay for them is by finding the money from elsewhere. So we've chosen to cut business rates for smaller businesses, and we are choosing to raise the revenue from the larger businesses, the larger corporations that have been getting away without paying their fair share for far too long. So that is my comment on that. By all means, I'll give way.
I'm grateful. The honourable member will recognise that it is the government's intention to reduce business rates for the smallest businesses. But as I've mentioned a couple of times in this debate, House of Commons library research does show that if you compare this year to 2 years' time, then small businesses will end up 80% worse off, whereas the big chains will end up 40% off better off. I believe this is an unintended consequence. Would he urge the Minister, as I am doing, to address that point in his wind-up?
I'm very grateful for the contribution from the honourable member. What I'd say to that is that while, of course, I've read the House of Commons library research into this, I also took time to listen to all of the witnesses who came forward at the Bill Committee stage. And they made it clear that this bill, that these changes will benefit small businesses in the long term. And I'm quite happy with their evidence, with the evidence that they provided to support the changes in this bill and the changes that this bill makes. What I'll do is I'll move on to the next part of my speech, and I'm happy to take any further interventions that might be relevant to that point, because I'm going to talk about the amendments now. I do think that new clauses 1, 2 and 3 are unnecessary. I think the government is going to monitor the effects of the new multipliers, and as we know, in the budget 2025, they will absolutely show what the effects of these multipliers has been. They will also do the same in any future fiscal statements. So the monitoring is already going to take place. So the Honourable Lady refers to changes and the impact that this might have in 2 years' time. Well, the government's going to be making a comment on that in the future budgets, in all future fiscal statements. In addition to this, Amendments 1 through 6 would significantly impact and reduce the support that the bill is able to provide retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. I do think it's a noble amendment, but by all means I'll give way.
You mentioned the leisure activities, and actually I've had some soft play facilities that have contacted me, and they've talked about the importance of play for children's well-being, but have said that actually they're not sure if they'll be entitled to that leisure exemption or that kind of lower rate, and actually even Parliament experts themselves are not sure. So I'd ask, would you support in calling on the government to clarify that soft play would be included in those lower business rates?
I'm very grateful for her intervention, and yes, if the Minister can provide clarity on that, that would be really helpful. As somebody who uses soft play, not personally, but for my son Oscar, as enjoyable as it is, for my son Oscar, for my son Arthur, who's 6 months old and not quite eligible to take advantage of soft play, I'm sure they'll be keen to know what the benefits are too, so perhaps the Minister can offer some clarity on that when he gives his closing remarks. But yes, Amendments 1 through 6, while they are noble, the bill is about the high street. We know just how much our high streets have suffered. Now, this does not mean for 1 second that we're backing down from the challenges facing manufacturing businesses, which is what Amendments 1 through 6 are aiming to help. The budget announced over £3 billion to support the manufacturing sector, including £520 million for a Life Sciences Innovative Manufacturing Fund. But the changes to business rates in this bill are primarily about supporting our high streets. Now, moving on. As somebody who was teaching on this date a year ago, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am particularly interested in Clause 5 of the bill, which does remove, as has been referenced, the charitable relief that some private schools enjoy. I welcome this, along with the broader measures in the budget to remove tax breaks from private schools so that we can fund state education properly. So a vote for Amendment 10 would actually delay this funding for state schools by another year. It is estimated that of the 2,444 private schools in England that this could affect, only 1,040 will be impacted by the change. It raises around 70 million in the process, which, when taken together with the other revenue-raising measures we've announced, actually increases per pupil funding in real terms to benefit the 94% of students who attend state schools. We must give every child the chance to succeed in life, and that is exactly what this bill and the other measures we've announced are doing. I'm very happy to give way if the honourable gentleman has a point to make. Now, by all means.
I just sometimes think it's worth reflecting that actually the education budget does go up every year. It doesn't go up because there's been a change in business rates or VAT or anything else. Sometimes with the logic we hear from members opposite, it sounds like, well, if the revenue from these things was slightly smaller than expected, does that mean there's less money going to go into education? Of course it doesn't. And by the way, we keep hearing this thing about hiring 6,500 more teachers. Does the honourable gentleman know how many more teachers were hired in the last Parliament?
Not enough.
I'm grateful for his intervention, and I heard him put that question to the Minister in last Monday's Westminster Hall debate. Just to go back to his original point, we'll come to 6,500 new teachers. We are taking these decisions to deliberately increase the amount of money that state schools have to teach all those 94% of students that enjoy state school education. I think as a basic principle, all members of this House can get behind the idea that it is a basic function of the state to provide a well-funded, excellent state place for all students, whether parents choose to take advantage of it or not. And that is exactly what we're doing with this bill and the other measures we've announced. By all means.
Talking of basic principles, does he therefore believe it is right to tax education? Yes or no?
I believe it is right to tax businesses. Private schools are businesses, and we are choosing to levy this tax on businesses. We are not choosing to levy this tax on state education because, as I was just setting out, it is imperative on us to make sure that there is a well-funded, excellent, state-funded place in education for all students, should parents choose to take advantage of it. And of course, it must be remembered, Madam Deputy Speaker, that not all parents have the choice of private education or state education. The reason that it stands at 94% of students in state education is because that choice does not exist for most parents in this country. And that is why we're going to take the necessary action to fund state schools properly. I will make some progress, because I can see Madam Deputy Speaker would like me to make some progress. Oh no, she's been quite generous with her time. Thank you. In which case, I'll take more interventions. Now, some in this House have raised concerns about whether this legislation adversely affects those private schools that are primarily concerned with teaching students with EHCPs. I'm pleased to report it does not. The government has clearly set out that private schools that teach 50% or more students with EHCPs, that's education, health, care and social care plans, will continue to be exempt from business rates, which is exactly the right approach. So there is no concerns there. Now, Amendment 8, turning to that, seeks to make exemptions for certain kinds of schools. And we've talked a little bit about faith schools. We talked about it a lot in the second reading. I can't support this amendment, given that we are ending these tax breaks to support the 94% of students that attend state schools. I can't support it for that. If we dilute the measures in this bill for this exception, it's easy to make an argument for the next exemption, and the next one, and the next one. Our guiding principle should be that every child is entitled to an excellent, properly funded state school place, as I think I've said repeatedly. Now, Amendment 9, which is the last one that I'll speak about, is written to give local authorities discretion over whether the higher multiplier will apply. As I'm sure many members in this House will know, local authorities already possess wide-reaching powers regarding discretionary rate relief. So given that this bill does not affect those powers at all, I don't think there's any requirement for this amendment. So, to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, the measures in this bill are vital to bring about the restoration of our high streets, support local businesses and give state schools the funding they desperately need. These are the priorities of this Labour government, and these are my priorities too. And if the members opposite claim to be the party of business again, if they ever hope to seize back the mantle of being the party of opportunity, I hope that they put their money where their mouth is and join us in voting for this unamended bill today. Thank you.
I thought it was very sensible for the honourable member to clarify that it's young Arthur that enjoys soft play, not himself personally. The final speaker, Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I've got about 2 hours to give this speech, I want to start by going back to the summer of 1983. Just told everyone how old I am, haven't I? No, look, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to speak in this debate, and thank you to the Minister for all his work on this bill. And I do genuinely want to thank all members from across the House for their contributions to the committee stage. I thought actually the way that it was discussed at committee stage and the contributions from both sides were actually really well thought out, and again, I mentioned it before, but done in a really respectful manner. Just saying that in advance of the interventions. You know, I also want to say thank you to all those people that came forward to provide evidence to the Bill Committee. And I say I'm honoured to rise today to speak on behalf of my constituencies of Harlow for this third reading of the non-domestic rating bill. But first, and I promise I won't take 2 hours, but I think everybody in the chamber will forgive me for taking an opportunity to thank and praise the hard-working teachers and school support staff across Harlow constituency for the incredible hard work that they do day in, day out to support young people. Yeah. I had the wonderful opportunity to visit Mark Hall School in my constituency last week and saw the incredible work that they were doing to provide a really inclusive atmosphere within their school. And what I particularly welcomed was that it wasn't just about exam results, it wasn't just about that, but it was about that what I describe as the hidden curriculum. It's about what young people, how young people grow and how young people develop. Particularly of interest to the member for East Hampshire, I'm only joking, it's okay, was they really focused on the importance of debating skills. I thought perhaps I could certainly, we could probably go together and learn a thing or two. And also the importance... I set myself up for that, don't I? And also the importance of critical thinking. And as I say, it was a fantastic opportunity, and it was capped, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the opportunity to meet the young carers in their school. And as many people across the House will know, young carers is a hugely important issue for me. On very briefly the issue of private schools, because it has been addressed a number of times within this House. I would say again, as I said in the second reading, that private schools that are affected by this policy can choose to absorb some of the cost if they wish, and that is their prerogative. And members across the House may disagree, but ultimately this is the fundamental issue here is one of fairness and equality. Every business... I've got time, yeah.
I thank the honourable gentleman. It was just mentioned that the private schools could absorb the cost. That is exactly what the head teacher of my Cardiff school said. They couldn't absorb the cost. They tried everything possible to stay open, but they cannot. So I think it's out. You cannot make this. One cannot make this claim that the schools can just absorb this cost. They can't. It's not.
I thank the honourable lady for her comment. Having had conversations with head teachers in private schools, I know that is actually what some private schools are looking to do. That may not be the case in your situation. However, The point I would make, and the point I made in the second reading, is ultimately we want all schools to be at a standard where actually parents don't need to choose to send their children to private school. Every business in the UK is required to pay VAT, and the Cambridge Dictionary definition of a business is a particular company that buys and sells goods and services. Parents pay for service of their teaching to pay for their children to go to private school. I will give way. This is fun.
Perhaps I can ask the honourable gentleman if he thinks universities are companies, and therefore would he advocate for VAT on fees for university education?
For his question, I think that we've had a very good debate about higher education today, and I think that actually it's interesting that party opposite want to talk about university and higher education when it's in an awful state, and clearly we need to look at how private schools are funded. I'm doing teacher, aren't I? Sorry, you can carry on rambling, it's not a school. Sorry. I would like to move on to the second part of my speech, which is talking about the high streets. And I think we would all agree of the importance to support our high street, but also recognise the changing nature of retail and actually the changing nature of our high streets. This bill is designed to decrease tax on high street businesses and increase and actually make online retailers pay their fair share. I would quote very briefly evidence given by the Co-op, who said this bill will benefit 92% of our estate, which is 98% of retail stores. It was described as having a significant impact. And equally, the representative of the Association of Convenience Stores said this bill is very helpful, positive to the sector and positive where they trade as well. I haven't taken 2 hours. Oh my God. But to finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome this bill. I welcome the proactive steps that this Labour government is taking to address the issues left by the previous government and to support small businesses in my constituency of Harlow and across the country.
I now come to the front benches and I call the Shadow Minister, David Simmonds.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. It appears that the attractions of business rates haven't been sufficient to draw as many speakers as some of the debates that take place in this chamber, but nonetheless, I'm grateful to all the members for the contributions that they made to today's debate. Just a few months ago, Madam Deputy Speaker, we exposed a £2.4 billion black hole in the local government budget. £3.7 billion of additional spending was announced, with only £1.3 billion of funding to pay for it. And over the weeks since that budget was announced, we've seen pensioners, businesses of all kinds and all sizes and types, schools, landlords, tenants, all facing additional costs to begin to backfill the consequences of those political choices. And with this bill before the House tonight, those tax hikes are heading for the business rates bill of companies and organisations, large and small, on high streets the length and breadth of the country. And we should not pretend, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this is an essential step. Our councils are acknowledged as the most efficient part of the public sector. They responded magnificently to the financial crash consequences in the late 2000s, with rising resident satisfaction against a backdrop of increasingly challenged budgets. But the decisions made by this new government, in particular loading an additional £1.66 billion of national insurance costs onto local authorities, with less than 1/3 of that covered by the promised additional funding, has consequences in our town halls. And what we see today is a bill that begins to try and make a small step towards bridging that colossal gap. But the government needs to own these political choices. The consequences of this bill for our businesses, for our schools, are stark. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, first let me address the changes in the multiplier, and in particular the consequences for larger premises. Under the changes to the business rate systems overall introduced by the government, it is increased costs loaded onto larger premises that will be providing the source for any reductions for smaller businesses, unlike under the previous government when this was covered from general grant. And as a result, these businesses, often small and medium-sized enterprises, important employers, vital sources of growth for our economy, will be facing higher bills. And these businesses, Madam Deputy Speaker, have been characterised by the government as warehouses often owned by online giants. But when we look at the detail from the government's own data, we see firms such as Banner Stationery, who supply the offices of members of Parliament with all kinds of stationery products, Tigervac Advanced Materials Limited and Zetec Semiconductors plc, which is an American-owned business, but trades on the London Stock Exchange, producing products that are vital for our security and growth. Madam Deputy Speaker, those are just examples in the Minister's own constituency of businesses that are hit by these changes. The Secretary of State's Scarpa Group Limited, a major healthcare provider, will be facing significantly higher bills. And we've heard members waxing lyrical about how much they value the opportunities for growth that we see in this country, and how they value in particular different types of community assets. 28 of the data centres that the Prime Minister speaks of as being vital to the AI agenda will be hit by the impact of this bill. 16 of the breweries that supposedly have benefited from a penny off the pint, including Fuller's, Bulmer's, John Smith's and Green King, all face significant increases in their bills. 8 zoos and safari parks, including Colchester, Bristol and Chester zoos, face significantly increased business rates bills. 48 stadiums across the country, including Wimbledon, Twickenham and both of the Manchester stadiums, all expect to see bigger rises as a consequence. And all those members opposite who love to champion their local pub, who talk about taking a penny off the pint, need to remember that the consequence of this bill is to put their business rates up on average by £5,500 a year per pub. The list is available from the government data. It is very clear that this is going to be a difficult bill for retail, hospitality and leisure to swallow after a period of direct and specific support from the previous government. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not from a government that came to office saying that this was its intention, that this was its plan.
Right.
This is from a government whose now Chancellor, Rachel from Accounts, went so far as to promise in 2021 that she would abolish business rates.
Absolutely right. Where's that promise?
So those business owners, those workers who thought they were voting for a Labour government that was coming in to abolish business rates face these significant increases today. And there is still, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is still no certainty on the small business rate relief, which so many of the witnesses at committee and so many of those who've been in touch with all of us as members of Parliament highlighted as incredibly important for smaller businesses and high streets in particular. And it comes against a backdrop of serious concerns expressed across the retail sector, across the licensed trade, the Association of Convenience Stores, whose comment on the bill was lukewarm to say the least, and some of the very biggest retailers, such as Sainsbury's, about the damage that the budget in general and this bill in particular does to employment and pay. And when we on this side reflect on the things that we can be proud of that we did in government, for me, 4 million more people in work in this country than when we took office, and youth unemployment halved against what it was when we took office, stand out. And this bill puts the families' financial well-being that are included in those statistics at risk. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill does not just relate to its impact on businesses. It also carries out the spiteful and politically motivated attacks that this government has introduced against education in the private sector. As my honourable friend, the member for South Northamptonshire, described, it isn't the case that those private schools are all luxury businesses, and many face significant challenges. And I think it's worth going through those in a little bit of detail to understand why the amendments are important and why many of the things that have been said about the consequences of this bill are simply incorrect. The first is to recognise that in the context of school financing, the measures in this bill and the introduction of VAT don't end up benefiting our state school. All those extra taxes, if every single penny were to find its way into state school budgets, represent the cost of half the salary of a single classroom teacher. Just the national insurance increases alone in school budgets wipe that out straight away. So state schools, unambiguously, will be worse off as a result of the measures set out in this budget. Of course.
Very grateful for the Shadow Minister giving way. Isn't one of the other problems is we've heard categorically from the other side that private schools are businesses. They see themselves as part of the community and charities. So now they are seen as businesses, they will act as businesses and have to look to raise revenue from all their sports facilities and anything else that they willingly gave away to the state system to work with the state system to make sure there is support for the state system as well. That is the community basis of what schooling is. Now they're defined as businesses. Does he share my concern that this is going to be a big problem?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend highlights a point which many of us will have heard about from our local state schools, that they are in sharing arrangements with private schools to access facilities, and they are concerned that as the cost drivers introduced by this government and this budget increase the pressure on those schools, that they may well lose the free or low-cost access that they have.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. I've had a meeting with a state school in my constituency that has said that this will be damaging to them because they get a grant from a private school which will have to cut that grant to deal with the impact of VAT. So a state school in my constituency in a genuinely working class community is going to be £200,000 a year worse off under this policy. Does he agree that that is terrible?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I agree it is terrible, but sadly it is typical of the consequences that are introduced into the system by the actions of this government. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's very simple, of course.
The honourable gentleman agrees with me that state schools shouldn't have to go with a begging bowl to private schools to ask to borrow their facilities. They should be properly funded in their own right.
Going backwards. You're making it worse.
So, Madam Deputy Speaker, having served as a governor in 3 different state schools in my local government career, I know that many of those state schools had facilities which they were very happy to share. Some of them have swimming pools, some of them have libraries, some of them have adult education facilities. The sharing of facilities amongst schools of all kinds and all types is normal. But this bill introduces additional pressure which will take some of that access to those facilities away, and in particular in isolated communities, in those that most benefit from that, they face losing it. But the basic fact that schools end up net worse off demonstrates that, contrary to some of what's been said, this policy fails that basic test of equity and efficiency. It harms some people in our country with no corresponding benefit to anybody else. And I gently say to a number of members who argue that the consequences are marginal. We heard a lot of evidence from different people. And to the member for Erewash, who made reference to an academic who's built a career writing tracts attacking the private sector in education, that is not somebody who I consider an expert. And I will take the word of mums and dads, the Independent Schools Council, institutions that represent people across our country, and the House of Commons Library over the word of a single left-wing academic. And to the member for Wolverhampton North East, who said it's not fair because schools in the state sector pay business rates. She may not be aware there's already an 80% mandatory business rate relief for voluntary aided foundation and academy schools. But for all state schools, 100% of whatever business rate liability they have is paid for by central government anyway. So no school budget is burdened by the cost of business rates, whereas the consequences of this bill is that every independent school will be burdened by the consequences of business rates. Many of us in this chamber, Madam Deputy Speaker, will see the added value that independent education brings. And, of course, many of those experts whose opinion we value are those who've spoken profoundly about the fact that so much of our special educational needs provision exists today in the private sector. And I made reference in the Bill Committee to the Gashare School in my own constituency. I would defy any member opposite visiting a share to come away and say that was a private business that deserves to be taxed. These are institutions which have emerged, in many cases, over a long period of time to cater for very specific, very deep, profound special educational needs and disabilities. And they are looking aghast at the consequences of this bill. And there are a number of reasons for that, which are, in some cases, technical. The government's solution to this is to introduce the wholly or mainly provision, whereby it says that schools that provide wholly or mainly, by which they mean 50% or more, places for children with an educational and healthcare plan will be exempted from the provisions. The problem with this policy, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that many children who have well-established diagnosed special educational needs and disabilities do not have an education and healthcare plan. Indeed, the last Labour government introduced a number of tiers beneath statementing, which was the then term, school action and school action plus. So for those parents of children with moderate to severe special educational needs and disabilities, they could fall into those categories and be supported in a mainstream setting. The statementing and educational healthcare plan process has only ever been intended to make provision for children with the most significant and the most severe needs. That is already the case across the state sector. And we know from the evidence of many parents, many mums and dads up and down the land, that the provision for their child who either didn't qualify or had not yet achieved an educational healthcare plan was found by them at their own cost in a local independent school. It's very clear as a consequence that the government's solution, which fails to take into account the fact that it massively underestimates the number of children with special educational needs and disability, so it falls well short of accounting for those numbers. This is a government whose Secretary of State for Education stood at the dispatch box last week and talked about how much they believe in inclusion. Well, their actions in supporting this bill say very much otherwise, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the bill also fails to address the needs of those parents who wish to secure a place for their child at a school which has a special character. Now, we all know, particularly important in rural areas, but an issue across the country. There are schools that have the ability to provide specialist training or coaching in a sport in which that child excels, in which they wish to pursue. There are schools that have a faith or cultural identity that is incredibly important to the family. And by requiring all of those types of schools to fall within the remit of having to pay these significantly hiked taxes, we see this government bearing down on choice in the education sector and pushing up costs for mums and dads, not wealthy families, but ordinary people in this country who are seeking to do the best for their child and who are willing, in some cases, to take on the responsibility of paying for it, even if they could still pursue, through the state systems, the opportunity of an educational and healthcare plan for their child. They choose to do the right thing by their child, and this government will be penalising them. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the amendments that we've brought forward seek to address these shortcomings as best we can. And we will also be supporting some of the amendments coming forward from other parties where those clearly fulfil our shared objectives. But as the speeches from this side, the contributions to this debate so far have showed, there could have been so many more amendments in seeking to get this right. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, all of the hereditaments, try and get that word right, that are covered by this bill are important to our economy, they're important to growth, and in many cases they are vital to our communities. Since the Chancellor's budget, growth has flatlined, inflation has revived, borrowing costs are rising, employment opportunities are diminishing. It is not too late for this government to choose a different path, and we invite you to do so this afternoon.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before I speak to the amendment tabled by the honourable members for Mid-Dorset and North Poole, Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner and St Albans, I would like to thank members from across the Chamber for their contributions and, by and large I should say, the constructive spirit in which they've engaged with the bill since its introduction. Although it's not always seen with the evidence sessions and committee stages, not always prime-time TV viewing, I accept it's a curse, but that's the way it is. They nevertheless are essential, actually, and the contributions that were made by all sides of the House in probing, in scrutinising, were valuable, and I hope that all members found those interesting. I'll begin by speaking to the amendments concerning the impact of the new multipliers. The proposed new Clause 1, tabled by the Honourable Member for Mid Dorset and North Poole, would require the Secretary of State to review the impact of Clauses 1 to 4 on businesses, high streets and economic growth within 6 months of those clauses coming into effect. The Honourable Member for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner and the Honourable Member for St Albans have proposed 2 other new clauses, New Clause 2 and New Clause 3, which would seek to impose in legislation a requirement for an analysis of the impact of the new business rate multipliers at varying points ahead of or following implementation. New Clause 3 also seeks to require an assessment of how the application of the new multipliers would differ between retail, hospitality and leisure businesses occupying different numbers of properties, and compare that with the impact of the retail, hospitality and leisure relief over the 2021 and 2025-26 financial years. We agree in principle with the points the Honourable Members have raised through their proposed new clauses. It's right that the Government considers the effects of its policies on businesses, on the high street, on economic growth and indeed within different sectors. And it is in fact the policy of the Government to see a material benefit felt by those businesses as a direct result of these measures. And so let me set out how we propose to do that. It's on the face of the bill that the 2 new retail, hospitality and leisure multipliers may not be set at more than 20 pence in the pound lower than the small business multiplier. For the higher multiplier, the business rate, the bill places appropriate restrictions in that, when set, it cannot be more than 10 pence in the pound above the standard multiplier and cannot be applied to properties with a rateable value of less than £500,000. Now, it's important to state that these are not the intended tax rates, but actually the maximum parameters to be introduced through the new business rate multipliers. And as we explained during the course of the bill's passage through the House, the actual tax rates will be set at the 2025 budget, taking into account the effects of the 2026 business rate revaluation, as well as the broader economic and fiscal context at that time. Yeah, I'll give way.
For giving way. He's been here throughout the debate and he's heard a number of my interventions. I accept the point he makes that those figures will not be published until the budget 2025. May I ask the Minister if he's in a position to give a cast-iron guarantee that small independents with small numbers of hereditaments will not be subsidising those organisations that have many that are very big chains?
Yeah, I mean, I heard, and I should say a lot of the principles about the need to really target and get to those small businesses that we all accept and we can all identify them in our own constituencies, of course, and they are important. I think, with respect, there's a degree of conflation. A conflation between the temporary relief that were brought in during COVID that the previous government didn't account for going forward, and those are always going to come to an end. The challenge that we had was, well, how do we reconcile that, given that we want ongoing support for the high street, but also a permanent relief in law, so that businesses knew exactly where they were up to and they could plan ahead with that certainty. And so the choice that we made was far fairer, that we target those higher value properties at more than £500,000, and they, not entirely, I accept, but generally are the large footprint warehousing, distribution premises that are used by the big online retailers. And in fact, the Shadow Minister, when he used the example in my own constituency of the stationery provider, they are an online retailer, and so they ought to be paying towards it. Why? Because for a long time, and we've all heard this from our constituents, we've all heard it from industry, we need to reconcile that rebalancing from online to on-street, from out of town to in-town, and that's exactly what this targeting does. So it wasn't ever intended to be a continuation of the relief that was only temporary during COVID. It's about rebuilding the foundations, and that's exactly what we have set out to do. Very briefly. Yeah.
For the Minister for giving way again. I completely accept, I'm very sympathetic with the point he makes that he inherited a sticking plaster system from the previous government. But if during the course of this year his government's own analysis proves what I'm using, what I've discovered from House of Commons research, would he make sure that the government does not at least rule out potentially introducing a new small business relief in a targeted way to support those small independent businesses?
I can say with all tax policy that we'll keep it under review. I say that in a very general sense. But we absolutely believe that through these measures, there will be businesses that are the backbone of our high streets, our town centres and communities, that if not for these measures would go bust. They wouldn't be viable and they would feel the heat very, very quickly. But because of the measures that we're taking, we are going to see a number of businesses being able to plan with that certainty for the future, knowing that they've got a government acting in partnership with them in that enterprise. Very briefly, yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate the Minister's point. Clearly, no Parliament binds its successors, so every Parliament has to make its own decisions on this. A lot of members have asked about small business rate relief. It would be really helpful to have some certainty from the dispatch box on the government's intention on that. Can he give us that certainty tonight?
Yeah. Well, we can certainly give the certainty that we are providing for in law for a permanent relief to be provided for retail, for hospitality and for leisure users, and we will fund that through a very targeted additional payment for properties more than £500,000 that will be primarily those big occupiers of warehousing and distribution centres occupied by the online retailers. It is a promise to shift from the online to the on-street that I talked about before. Now, to make some progress before we move on to votes on the amendments, now, the House will know that tax policy and legislation is not subject to the same requirement for an impact assessment that accompanies non-other fiscal policy decisions. Nevertheless, the Treasury is committed to publish an analysis of the effects of the new multipliers of Budget 2025, which we hope goes some way to reassuring honourable members that we will be considering the impact of this policy carefully before the new rates are set. And the Government will continue to keep the policy and its effects under review as a matter of course, because we believe it's good practice to do that on all taxes. However, we want to make it clear to honourable members that the Government has heard them and we understand the importance of robustly understanding tax changes, and this is something we've already committed to. I hope that this commitment in really understanding the effects of the new tax rate when introduced allows honourable members to withdraw the proposed new clauses on that basis. Now, turning to Amendment 9. This amendment seeks to give local authorities discretion over whether the higher multipliers enabled by the bill should be applied. The bill would enable the Treasury, through regulations, to introduce permanently lower multipliers for qualifying retail, hospitality and leisure properties, and to fund this by introducing higher multipliers for properties with a rateable value of more than £500,000 or more. As explained at committee, we do not have any plans to narrow the scope of the higher multipliers, as doing so would reduce the amount of funding available to support that very targeted support for lower multipliers for the type of uses that I know everyone in this chamber supports. But that does not mean that local authorities will be unable to apply local discretion to rate bills. As was set out in the contributions earlier on, local authorities already have very wide-ranging powers for discretionary rate relief, as set out in Section 47 of the Local Government Finance Act 1988, where the authority is satisfied that this would be reasonable, having regard to the interests of council taxpayers, and we can assure the House that these discretionary powers are unaffected by the bill and they remain in place. And so, given that local authorities will be able to use these discretionary powers to provide relief, including for ratepayers subject to the higher multiplier, the proposed amendment is not required. And I hope that this provides assurance to members in the House. I will now speak to Amendments 1 to 6, which seek to widen the scope of the lower multipliers so that qualifying manufacturing properties will become eligible alongside retail, hospitality and leisure properties. The Honourable Member for Newton Abbott spoke during the Bill Committee of the vital importance of manufacturing to the British economy and providing a permanent cut for their business rates that could help manufacturing businesses to recover. Now, let me start by reiterating the government's support for the manufacturing sector as a whole. It is said that Britain is a nation of shopkeepers, but it's also a nation of innovators, of creators, of entrepreneurs, and our manufacturing sector helps bring many of those ideas to life, and we understand the importance of them. But the government must also support our high streets, the hoteliers and the restaurateurs and publicans. And it's that especially important for a property tax, such as business rates, where these sectors rely on good locations, therefore in the business rate system, often valuable locations. And so if we don't have that targeted support, they will feel the hit very, very strongly. And so what we're doing through this bill is delivering our manifesto pledge to protect valuable town centres and high streets by enabling the introduction of permanently lower taxes for qualifying retail, hospitality and leisure properties from 2026-27, ending the uncertainty of the annual retail, hospitality and leisure relief that has been rolled over year on year since the COVID-19 pandemic. We have been clear throughout this process that this tax cut must be fully funded. And so, against the current fiscal backdrop, a widening of the scope of properties that are eligible for the lower multipliers may dilute the support that government is able to provide. Or it may even require a higher tax rate for those properties with values of more than £500,000 and above to fund the new multipliers in the way that we would see the impact following through. However, we respect honourable members' points of view and agree that our manufacturing sector should be recognised and supported. Advanced manufacturing is one of the 8 growth driving sectors identified as part of the government's industrial strategy. At the autumn budget, the government announced £975 million for the aerospace sector over 5 years, over £2 billion for the automotive sector over the same period, and £520 million for the new Life Sciences Innovation Manufacturing Fund. And this is how the government intends to support these innovators, these creators and the entrepreneurs that we mentioned earlier on. And it's because we have this package in place to support manufacturing that we can't accept the honourable member's amendment. However, we do hope that we've been able to provide reassurance as to our commitment to support the sectors that all the House, I'm sure, recognise are vitally important. I'll now turn to discuss Amendments 7 and 8 proposed on New Clause 5 of the Bill, which removes business rates charitable relief for private schools. Both of these clauses seek to introduce new or expand existing provisions within the Bill to ensure that certain private schools remain eligible for business rates charitable relief. Amendment 7 would result in fee-paying schools retaining their charitable relief if that school wholly or mainly catered for pupils with special educational needs, as defined under Section 20 of the Children and Families Act 2014, whether or not those pupils have an education, health and care plan. Amendment 8 would result in private faith schools or a private school with special character maintaining its eligibility for charitable relief if there is no maintained or academy school of the same faith or special character within the statutory walking distance as set out in the Education Act 1996. While Amendment 8 does not indicate what may constitute a special character, we understand from contributions in the House previously made that this would include schools which follow a particular method of education. Amending the basis on which fee-paying schools are eligible to retain their charitable relief, their rates relief, in the manner which these amendments would propose would undermine the government's intention to remove tax breaks for private schools. As we have said, the removal of the tax break is necessary in order to fund schools to support over 90% of pupils who are educated in the state sector. The government has carefully considered its approach to ensuring that the impact on pupils within the most acute needs is minimised. The bill provides that private schools that are charities that wholly or mainly, i.e. over 50%, provide education for pupils with an education, health and care plan do remain eligible for the charitable relief that is provided within the bill. As honourable members will be aware, most children with special educational needs, with or without an EHCP, had their needs met within mainstream state-funded schools. If an EHCP assessment concludes that a child can only be supported in a private school, then the local authority directly funds that place. Where an EHCP has not named a private school, the parents or carers of the child may choose to place that child in a private school. But this is a choice made by the parent and does not detract from the assessment that the pupil's need can be catered for within the mainstream state-funded sector. While there may be some instances where a child's parents disagree with the local authority's assessment that their needs can be met within the state sector, the EHCP system is the most appropriate channel for resolving such disagreements. The government is aware of the concerns raised by honourable members and others that with respect to pupils with special educational needs in private schools that they may lose their charitable relief. The government believes that through the approach adopted in the bill, most private special schools will not be affected by the measures outlined at all. In fact, we expect that any private special school losing eligibility for private relief to be the exception And our assessment says potentially that will be in the single figures. And it's important that we keep it in that context. I haven't got time actually before we begin to wind up. Now, private schools that benefit from the existing rates exemption for properties that are wholly used for the training or welfare of disabled people will continue to do so. The majority of children in England who have special educational needs, with or without an EHCP, have their needs met in the state sector already. And it's in the government's ambition that all children and young people with special educational needs or a disability receive the right support to succeed in their education as they move to adult life. I'm going to skip ahead to make progress to keep within the time. Now, as members know, all schools are required to follow the Equality Act, which includes fostering and promoting an environment that encourages respect and tolerance of children and families of all faiths and of none. We've listened carefully to arguments relating to exempting faith schools from the bill's measures, and we've decided that a carve-out for faith schools or schools with other special characteristics, as we've heard, cannot be justified. For these reasons, we're unable to accept the honourable member's amendments. Finally, I will speak to Amendment 10, which would delay the removal of charitable rate relief from private schools by 1 year to April 2026. To eliminate barriers to opportunity, we need to concentrate on the broader picture towards the state sector, where most children are educated. Ending the tax breaks on VAT and business rates for private schools is a tough, but in the end, a necessary decision that will secure additional funding to help deliver on the government's commitments to education and young people. Together, the policy to apply VAT to private schools, these policies are expected to raise over £1.8 billion a year by 2030, funding essential to improving the education for the vast majority of school-aged children. Delaying the implementation of this policy would forgo about £140 million, which frankly can just not be justified. Now, the House have heard a good range of amendments on the bill, and I hope that I've been able to address the measures that I've outlined in the response. And while we accept that we've not been able to accept the amendments, I do hope that the assurances that have been outlined are accepted and members feel able to withdraw the amendments as they stand. If not, of course, the government couldn't support them.
The question is that new clause 1 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! Division! Clear the lobby. Question is that new clause 1 be read a second time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes are Jamie Stone and Susan Murray. Tellers for the noes are Gerald Jones and Anna McMorrin. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 175. The noes to the left, 342.
The ayes to the right were 175. The noes to the left, 342. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order, order. Under the order of the House of the 25th of November. Under the order of the House of the 25th of November 2024, I must now put the questions necessary to bring proceedings on consideration to a conclusion. New Clause 2 has been selected for separate decision. I call David Simmonds to move New Clause 2 formally.
I beg to move, Madam Deputy.
The question is that New Clause 2 be added to the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. No! Division! Clear the lobby. That New Clause 2 be added to the bill. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Richard Holden and Rebecca Smith. The tellers for the noes, Gerald Jones and Anna McMorrin.
the right, 174. The noes to the left, 340.
The ayes to the right were 174, the noes to the left 340, so the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. Amendment 7 has been selected for separate decision. I call David Simmonds to move the amendment formally.
I beg to move, Madam.
The question is that Amendment 7 be made. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. Division. Is that Amendment 7 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Richard Holden and Rebecca Smith. The tellers for the noes are Anna McMorrin and Gerald Jones. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 172. The noes to the left, 341.
The ayes to the right were 172, the noes to the left 341, so the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. Consideration completed. Third reading.
Now.
Minister to move third reading.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this bill will now be read for a third time. I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge all the contributions that we've heard through the passage of the bill. I also want to thank particularly my private office for the support that they've offered during the course of this process, to officials in our department for the outstanding work that they have done, and also for colleagues in the Department for Education, the Treasury, as well as clerks of the House that have supported the process of the bill. This bill honours the Government's manifesto pledge to end business rates charitable rate relief for private schools in England and to fundamentally reform the business rate system. We are kick-starting this endeavour through the introduction of lower tax rates for retail, hospitality and leisure properties. And I would like to thank all members who contributed both in the evidence sessions, in the committee stages and today for the contributions that they have made. I hope, even though there were disagreements on parts of the new clauses and on the amendments, that there is an acknowledgement at least that we have gone a long way to make sure that we really get to the heart of what this bill is intended to do when it comes to the high street and our town centres, which in the end, and whatever differences there will be, and there are plenty, let's be honest, we all know how important our small businesses are to the viability of our high streets. And importantly, we all recognise that these are more than just places to do business. They are places that the community look to as the heart of a community, and they're always more really greater than the sum of their parts. And so hopefully members will see that the measures have really kind of made a dent into there. I also want to place on record our thanks to those who gave evidence during the evidence sessions, to the Institute of Revenues, Rating and Evaluation, the British Retail Consortium, the Co-op Group, M&S, the Shopkeepers Campaign, the British Property Federation, the Independent Schools Council, all of which allowed for us to scrutinise the bill properly and to get evidence from professionals who understand what this is like on the ground, and I do think that that added value to the process. And for all who attended and gave evidence to the Public Bill Committee, I'd like to thank them for their time and willingness to share their expertise. I would also like to extend thanks to honourable members who attended the Public Bill Committee to ask questions, to foster debate and to contribute to discussions as we take these important first steps to transform the business rate system. The bill will help to secure additional funding to help the Government deliver its commitments to the majority of children who attend state schools, the second part of this bill. Ending tax breaks for private schools is a tough, but as we said before, a necessary decision. And it will come to welcome news to most parents in England and represents the Government's determination to break down the barriers to opportunity and to ensure that all children get a high-quality education. And let's be absolutely clear that over 90% of children in this country go to state schools and they deserve the best too. Well, now they're going to get it. And let me assure members, the education system in England is prepared for the relatively small number of pupils that may move as a result of the measures in this bill. We have heard a lot that in the end runs the risk of scaremongering, not supported by evidence, about churn in the system. We need to reflect, one, there is always change in the system, even before these measures were introduced. But importantly, we are marshalling and we are organising to make sure that parents and pupils are supported if they need it, but we believe that will be around the edges. This will also provide certainty to high streets by making provision to introduce a permanent tax cut for retail, hospitality and leisure properties. Now, we've heard a lot about the change from the COVID relief coming through to the permanent baked-in relief that we're providing through this bill. And the opposition have said a number of times actually during the course of this bill passage that it represents somehow a reduction. But there is a degree of honesty required here, because they know, as we know, that there was no provision, not a single pound, not a single pence, for the continuation of the temporary relief provided during COVID that were being relied on by retailers, hospitality providers and leisure providers. They know that is a matter of fact. We know it's a matter of fact. But the difference is, and the only difference, is that while they were willing to politically point score, while businesses were waiting for maturity and for an answer to the problem, we were getting on with the job of government. We were providing that permanent support that businesses need. And how are we going to pay for it? Because we've heard a lot where the opposition will say they don't support measures, but they always support the investment. They support the investment in state schools, but they don't support the measures to generate the income. They support the measures here to support the high street, but they don't seem to support the measures to ensure that those with £500,000 value or more pay more into the pot to support it. And the reality is, this has not just come out of the blue. They had 14 years to address the imbalance from the online to the on-street, to the out-of-town to the in-town, and they did nothing. And so to sit there during the course of the bill and somehow try to present that they are the champions of enterprise, they are the champions of our town centres, they are the town centres of the champions of our small businesses, frankly, is ridiculous. Now, they have an opportunity yet. We've sorted out the amendments. They were nonsense, and most people will accept that. But what we have now is third reading where we do get to vote on the substance of the bill. And they could do the right thing. They could change course. They could back support for state schools to get the money that they need. They could back measures to get money to the high street and our town centres and do the right thing. Now is the time to show that they will be the mature opposition that they promised to be. But I somehow expect that will not be the path that they choose. But luckily, this is a government that is getting on with the job, and I commend the bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. Kevin Hollinrake.
Well, can I thank the Minister and indeed my shadow ministers and the opposition spokespeople and all the parliamentarians that have helped with the passage of the bill, the clerks and the officials. Not that I would like to see this bill pass any further. Aristotle, in his book Politics, over 2,000 years ago, over 2,000 years ago, talked about deviant government, alongside tyranny, Madam Deputy Speaker, alongside tyranny, he placed democracy. And he said that because he said sooner or later the risk is a government would come along that only represents its own interests and those of its supporters. Those of its supporters. And those of its supporters. And that government would pursue a course of the politics of envy. The politics of envy, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let's see who his supporters are. The supporters are not the pensioners, not the 12.6 million pensioners in this country, if you judge by their winter fuel allowance, not the farmers, the 89,500 farmers whose livelihoods will be damaged by the family farm tax, not the 5 million business people who will be damaged by the business property relief, those people who employ 14 million people and pay £200 billion a year in taxes, not those people who live in rural areas, and not indeed the families of the 550,000 young people who go to private and independent education. 90,000 of those who are at risk, according to the IFS, that is not scaremongering, the IFS, who may go back into the state sector as a result of these changes, of their choices. And their choices, they have the gall to say that the fact that the business rates or VAT is not applied to school fees is a tax break. It is no more a tax break than the fact there's no VAT on housing or children's clothes or food. It is there because we should encourage people to pursue a course of education, particularly those people who scrimp and save to be able to send those children into private education. And what about businesses? Businesses who are suffering on the back of the £25 billion a year employers' national insurance rise. The businesses who are worried about the future because of withdrawal of business property relief, of agricultural property relief, many of those who he says he seeks to now protect, those people in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. The reality is this is a cut in the support for those people. The 75% discount is down to 40%, and that will mean the tangible difference for the average pub, £5,500 a year, on top of those huge increases that are derived from the employers' national insurance rise. 250,000 businesses will be worse off, to the tune of £925 million. That's the tax charge he is placing on those businesses he says he seeks to protect. And the reality is, if he's honest with us, with those businesses, those taxes will go up again in April 2026. That's the reality of these situations. And of course, what promise did he give us before the election? They give us before the election. They said they would scrap business rates completely. Where's the sign? Where was that another promise broken? And then in the manifesto, they would change the balance from high street to online giants. That is not what this does. It also taxes breweries, it taxes airports, it taxes football stadiums, it taxes John Lewis and Sainsbury's and Morrison's, all those bricks and mortar retailers. That's the reality behind their changes. No scrapping, no online giants, big taxes on many businesses. This is the politics of envy. It is a tyranny of socialism, and that's why we'll be voting against this evening.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Gerald Jones and Anna McMorrin. The tellers for the noes are Rebecca Smith and Greg Smith. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 341. The noes to the left, 171.
The ayes to the right were 341, the noes to the left 171. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock.